This is a story about 600 men, mostly sharecroppers, barely educated, poor, black, living in one of the most impoverished counties in Alabama during the Great Depression. They thought the government was finally helping them. Free medical care, hot meals, certificates of appreciation, burial insurance when they died. All they had to do was show up for regular checkups to treat their bad blood. But the government wasn't treating anything. They were watching, observing, taking notes for 40 years. As these men went blind, as they lost their minds, as their hearts failed and their bodies broke down from a disease that had a cure the doctors knew about, a cure they deliberately withheld. This is the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. And it wasn't just evil. It was meticulous. It was funded. It was published in medical journals. It was defended by doctors who thought they were doing important science. And when someone finally tried to stop it, the government said no. Not yet. The experiment isn't finished. Let's start in 1932. Macon County, Alabama, population 27,000, 82% black. The county had one of the highest syphilis rates in the nation. Around 35% of the black population was estimated to be infected. This wasn't a secret. In fact, it's exactly why the U.S. Public Health Service chose this location. Dr. Taliaferro Clark was analyzing data from an earlier study when a thought struck him. His own words, "The Alabama community offered an unparalleled opportunity for the study of the effects of untreated syphilis." Think about that phrase, unparalleled opportunity, not a crisis to solve, an opportunity to exploit. The original plan was modest, at least by the standards of what it would become. Study these men for 6 months to a year, observe the progression of the disease, then treat them. But funding dried up. The Great Depression was devastating the economy. And here's where the study took its darkest turn. Instead of treating the men and ending the project, the Public Health Service made a decision. Keep going. Just watch. No treatment. Follow them to autopsy. They needed local cooperation. So they partnered with the Tuskegee Institute, a historically black university founded by Booker T. Washington. The Institute had credibility in the community. If Tuskegee was involved, people would trust it. They recruited Dr. Eugene Dibble, an African-American physician, as a consultant, and they hired a local nurse who had built a reputation in the area, Eunice Rivers. Nurse Rivers would become the face of the study, the only consistent staff member across all 40 years. She was born in Georgia in 1899, trained at Tuskegee Institute, and had spent years working with the Institute's movable school, traveling to rural communities to provide basic health education to black families. She was trusted, she was respected, and the Public Health Service knew this. They needed someone who could bridge the gap between white government doctors and poor black sharecroppers who had every reason to distrust both. The recruitment began. Government doctors spread word through Macon County that they were offering free medical examinations for bad blood. This was a colloquial term in the South that could mean almost anything. Anemia, fatigue, syphilis, general unwellness. It was vague by design. The men were never told they had syphilis. They were never told they were part of an experiment. They were told they were getting treatment. 600 men enrolled. 399 had latent syphilis. They'd already been infected for years, their disease no longer in the highly contagious early stages, but settled into a chronic condition that would slowly destroy their bodies. The other 201 men were a control group. They didn't have syphilis. They were there for comparison. What did the men receive? Physical exams, blood draws, x-rays, spinal taps, which were excruciatingly painful procedures where doctors inserted needles into the spine to extract cerebrospinal fluid. The men were told these spinal taps were special treatments. They were given certificates that looked official. They got hot meals on examination days, a significant benefit during the Depression when food was scarce. And they were promised burial insurance, which meant their families wouldn't be left with funeral costs. What they didn't receive was medicine that could help them. They got aspirin. They got iron tonics. They got vitamin supplements, placebos. The men thought they were being cared for. They were being observed like lab specimens. Now here's where the timeline becomes critical. In the 1920s, before the study started, there were treatments for syphilis, but they were brutal. Arsphenamine, an arsenic-based compound, could work, but caused severe side effects and required many painful injections over a long period. When the Tuskegee study began in 1932, this was still the standard treatment. Dangerous, but something. But by 1943, everything changed. Penicillin, a safe, effective, relatively painless antibiotic that could cure syphilis in most cases, with just a few injections. By 1947, penicillin was the widely accepted standard treatment for syphilis. It was being used across the country. And the men in Tuskegee, they received none of it. The doctors running the study knew about penicillin. They discussed it. They made a conscious decision. Do not treat these men. The study must continue. They wanted to observe the full progression of untreated syphilis from infection to death to autopsy. Penicillin would interfere with the data. Dr. Raymond Vonderlehr, who took over the study early on, was particularly determined to see it through. He sent letters to local doctors throughout Macon County with a clear message. If any of these men come to you for treatment, do not help them. Notify us immediately. One man did try to get treated. He drove to a clinic in Montgomery. The doctors there examined him and started to give him arsenicals. Then a call came, "Through. This man is part of the study. Stop treatment immediately." The doctors were warned. If you treat another subject from Tuskegee, you will lose your federal funding. During World War II, Dr. Vonderlehr went even further. He arranged for the study participants to be exempted from the draft, not out of compassion. He was worried the military would treat them for syphilis as part of their routine medical screenings. Can't have that. The men must remain untreated. This wasn't a secret study. That's one of the most disturbing aspects. Between 1936 and 1973, researchers published at least 13 articles about the Tuskegee study in medical journals. The titles were explicit. Untreated Syphilis in the Male Negro. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis, the 30th year of observation. Any doctor reading those journals would have known what was happening, yet almost no one raised objections. The medical community was silent. The study continued through the 1950s, through the 1960s, through the Civil Rights Movement, through the March on Washington, and the Voting Rights Act and Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Black Americans were fighting for basic human dignity, and the federal government was still watching men in Alabama die from a curable disease. And the men kept coming back because Nurse Rivers was there. She drove them to appointments. She handed out their vitamin tonics. She listened to their concerns. She attended their funerals and comforted their families. To the men, she was a lifeline. Many of them called her their angel. They trusted her completely. Whether she understood the full scope of what she was participating in remains debated by historians. Some see her as complicit, using her education and position to enable a racist atrocity. Others see her as trapped by the professional hierarchies of her time, a black woman nurse in the Jim Crow South who had no power to challenge white male doctors and no legal protections if she spoke out. She was the only woman, the only black person with any significant role in the study's operations. And she kept the men enrolled. In the mid-1960s, something finally shifted. A young epidemiologist named Peter Buxton was hired by the Public Health Service in San Francisco. His job was to interview patients with sexually transmitted diseases. One day in the office coffee room, he overheard older colleagues talking about a study in Alabama, a 30-year-old study, black men, untreated syphilis, just watching them die. Buxton couldn't believe it. He later said, "I didn't want to believe it. This was the Public Health Service. We didn't do things like that." But they did, and he had proof. In November 1966, Buxton filed an official protest on ethical grounds with the Division of Venereal Diseases. He pointed out the obvious. This study was morally indefensible. The men weren't being treated, even though treatment existed. They hadn't given informed consent. They didn't even know they had syphilis. This was wrong. The response? Rejected. The experiment is not yet complete. Buxton tried again in November 1968, just months after the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr. He argued the political angle now, this study is a powder keg. If the public finds out the government has been watching black men die for decades, there will be outrage. This needs to end. Again, his concerns were dismissed, not relevant. Study continues. In 1967, Buxton was summoned to a meeting at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. He thought maybe they were finally taking him seriously. Instead, he walked into a room full of senior PHS officials who were furious with him. One doctor in particular, John Cutler, an assistant surgeon general deeply involved in the study, pinned his ears back in Buxton's words. Cutler raged at him. "This is serious scientific work. These men are volunteers. You're talking about harm? They're sharecroppers getting free medical care. What's the problem?" Buxton pulled out one of Cutler's own reports. It stated clearly that the men would never have participated without the suasion of burial expenses. They weren't volunteers in any meaningful sense. They were poor, desperate, and manipulated. Cutler exploded. "I didn't write that. I didn't write that." The room went silent. Everyone looked nervous. Buxton left that meeting knowing he'd get nowhere within the system. So he left the Public Health Service. He went to law school, but the study haunted him. For years, he tried to figure out what to do. He had no legal protection as a whistleblower. He could be sued. His career could be destroyed. But by 1972, he couldn't stay quiet anymore. He reached out to a friend, Edith Lederer, a reporter with the Associated Press. July 1972, Lederer was at the Democratic National Convention in Miami Beach, covering the chaotic nomination process that would lead to George McGovern's presidential campaign. She found Jean Heller, a 29-year-old investigative reporter on the AP's Special Assignment Team, the only woman on that team. Lederer handed her a thin manila envelope. "I'm not an investigative reporter," she told Heller, "but I think there might be something here." Inside were documents from Buxton detailing 40 years of deliberate neglect. Heller started digging. She contacted the CDC. At first, officials kept putting her off. Finally, she told them she was publishing with or without their comment. They confirmed everything. July 25, 1972. Jean Heller's story hit the Washington Star and the front page of the New York Times the next day. For 40 years, the U.S. Public Health Service has conducted a study in which human guinea pigs, denied proper medical treatment, have died of syphilis and its side effects. The reaction was immediate: outrage, shock, disbelief. How could the government do this? How did this go on for 40 years? Congressional hearings were scheduled. An ad hoc advisory panel was convened. In October 1972, just months after Heller's article, the panel declared the study ethically unjustified. The results were disproportionately meager compared with known risks to human subjects involved. Translation: it was evil and scientifically worthless. November 16, 1972, the Tuskegee study officially ended 40 years and 2 months after it began. The damage was catastrophic. By 1972, only 74 of the original 399 syphilitic men were still alive. 28 had died directly from syphilis, 100 more had died from complications related to the disease. 40 of their wives had been infected. 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis, suffering disabilities and health problems from birth. And those are just the numbers we know. How many girlfriends were infected? How many stillbirths happened? How many lives were destroyed by a disease that could have been cured with a few shots of penicillin? In 1973, Congress held hearings. Survivors and family members testified. The government squirmed. In 1974, a class action lawsuit was settled for $10 million. Living syphilitic participants received $7,500 each. Heirs of deceased syphilitic participants received $15,000. Living members of the control group received $16,000. Heirs of deceased control group members received $5,000. Money couldn't undo the damage, but it was something. The Tuskegee Health Benefit Program was established to provide medical care to survivors. In 1975, it was expanded to include wives, widows, and children. Some of these benefits continue even today. New laws were passed. The National Research Act of 1974 created institutional review boards to oversee all studies involving human subjects. Researchers were now required to obtain informed consent. Participants had to be told what was being studied, what the risks were, and what their rights were. The Belmont Report, published in 1979, established ethical principles for research, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. All of this came directly from Tuskegee, but the damage to trust, that's still with us. In 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology. 5 survivors attended the ceremony at the White House. Herman Shaw, one of the survivors, stood beside Clinton as the president spoke. The United States government did something that was wrong, deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. It was an outrage to our commitment to integrity and equality for all our citizens. To the survivors, to the wives and family members, the children and the grandchildren, I say what you know. No power on earth can give you back the lives lost, the pain suffered, the years of internal torment and anguish. What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry. Herman Shaw responded, "We were treated unfairly in some cases, and in other cases, we were not treated at all. We were subjects in a government study. Some of us were given treatment, while others were not. We became symbols of what could go wrong when a government runs amok." His words were measured, dignified, more forgiving than the government deserved. The legacy of Tuskegee extends far beyond those 600 men. Studies have shown that after the experiment was revealed in 1972, life expectancy for black men in the affected counties dropped, not because of syphilis, but because of mistrust. Black Americans became less likely to seek medical care, less likely to participate in medical studies, less likely to trust public health officials. When the HIV/AIDS epidemic hit in the 1980s, conspiracy theories spread through black communities. Some believed AIDS was a government bioweapon designed to kill black people. Why would they believe that? Because the government had literally done something similar in Tuskegee. During the COVID-19 pandemic, public health officials faced vaccine hesitancy in black communities. Again and again, Tuskegee came up, "Why should we trust you? You watched our grandfathers die." The NIH, the CDC, and other organizations have worked to rebuild that trust, but it takes generations to repair damage this profound. And Tuskegee wasn't the only experiment. In 2010, we learned about another public health service study conducted from 1946 to 1948 in Guatemala. Researchers deliberately infected nearly 700 people, prisoners, soldiers, mental patients, even sex workers, with syphilis and gonorrhea, without their consent, without their knowledge. They wanted to test whether penicillin could prevent infection if given soon after exposure. President Obama issued an apology in 2010, but the fact that the same research group conducted both studies, Tuskegee and Guatemala, shows this wasn't an isolated moral failure. It was a pattern. So what do we take from this? First, the Tuskegee experiment wasn't a rogue operation. It was official policy, funded by the federal government, overseen by the Public Health Service, the predecessor to the CDC, published in peer-reviewed journals, defended by respected doctors. This wasn't a few bad apples. This was institutional racism embedded in American medicine. Second, the men weren't volunteers in any real sense. They were lied to. They were told they had bad blood and were being treated. When they tried to get actual treatment elsewhere, they were chased down and brought back. Local doctors were threatened with loss of funding if they helped. This was coercion, not consent. Third, the experiment had no scientific value. The Tuskegee study didn't discover anything new about syphilis. The natural progression of the disease was already well documented. The researchers' stated goal was to see if syphilis affected black men differently than white men. This premise itself was racist pseudoscience. There's no biological basis for race-based differences in disease progression. The study was designed to confirm existing racist assumptions, and even then, it failed. Fourth, many people knew, doctors, nurses, administrators, public health officials. They published articles. They attended conferences. They passed the study from one supervisor to the next over 40 years. No one stopped it. The silence was deafening, and finally, it took a whistleblower to end it. Not the medical community, not the government. Peter Buxton, a 27-year-old epidemiologist who refused to accept that this is how things are done. He risked his career. He fought for years. He was ignored, dismissed, and told to be quiet. And when the system failed completely, he went to the press. That's what it took. Peter Buxton died in May 2024 at the age of 86. He spent his later years giving talks on medical ethics. He attended memorial services for the Tuskegee survivors. He was inducted into Delta Omega, the honorary society in public health. But for most of his life, he wasn't widely known. Many accounts of Tuskegee don't even mention his name. Whistleblowers rarely get the recognition they deserve, especially when they expose atrocities this massive. Eunice Rivers Laurie died in 1986. She never gave many interviews about the study. One oral history exists, recorded by Harvard's Black Women Oral History Project in 1977. In it, she defends her work, calling it unfair that critics came so much later. She says she cared for the men, that she did what she could within the constraints of her position. Whether that's true or a rationalization, we'll never fully know. What we do know is that she remained in Tuskegee, continued her nursing career, and was respected in her community until her death. Her headstone reads, Eunice Verdell Laurie, not Rivers, not the name associated with the study, just Laurie. Jean Heller, the reporter who broke the story, left journalism in 2008 to write mystery novels. She lives in North Carolina now. In interviews on the 50th anniversary of her investigation, she called the Tuskegee study one of the grossest violations of human rights I can imagine. She's right. This story should make you angry. It should disturb you, because 40 years isn't ancient history. This wasn't the 1800s. This was happening while Americans were watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. While Woodstock was happening, while the Beatles were breaking up, ordinary life was going on, and in Alabama, the government was watching men die. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment is a scar on American history. It's a reminder that following orders isn't an excuse, that science can be twisted to serve evil, that institutional power left unchecked will exploit the vulnerable, and that trust, once broken, takes generations to rebuild. Those 600 men deserve to be remembered, not as subjects, not as specimens, as human beings who were betrayed by a government that was supposed to protect them, as fathers and husbands and brothers who suffered so doctors could take notes, as victims of a system that saw black lives as expendable in the name of research that wasn't even scientifically valuable. 40 years, 600 men, countless families destroyed, one of the most shameful chapters in American medical history, and it only ended because one person refused to stay silent. Remember their names, remember what happened, and make sure it never happens again. You can click in these other videos if you like this one. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel for more history documentaries.